Lost, ranking the seasons. Hello and welcome to this week's video. Now, I've done some ranking the seasons videos for TV shows before, and this week I thought I'd take a look at the 2000s fantasy mystery series Lost. Lost was a massively successful show at the time. These days it still has its hardcore fans, but it also has many detractors, with many people disappointed by the last season and the last episode in particular. Now, what do I think? Well, I guess we'll find out. I was a big fan at the time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I did not watch it again, however, for a long time. In fact, it's been about 8 years since I've seen any of it, but I actually watched the whole series again earlier this year. So I thought I'd do a ranking video to say what I thought about it after all this time has passed. Now, there are 6 seasons, so 6 places. 6th place, I would probably put season 6, to be honest. Now, I don't hate season 6, so don't get me wrong. I just think it kind of falls a little bit flat. I don't think it's terrible or anything like that. I just think it's probably not quite as good as previous seasons. Now, I don't have a problem with any of the actual ideas in the season. It's just that the execution, it doesn't quite work as well as some other seasons. It's difficult to see what it is. The ideas are good. They're not quite properly put across. I mean, I don't even mind the flash sideways stuff or where that leads to in the last episode. Again, the ideas are fine. I think my main problem with it is that there are many episodes, much like with some of the flashbacks in earlier seasons, where that stuff really feels like padding rather than necessary to the story. And that's kind of a little bit of a problem, especially when some of the main narrative on the island, some of that stuff feels like it's a little bit rushed and feels like we should have perhaps had a bit more time devoted to that instead of some of the flash sideways stuff. Some of which, not all, some of it's really good, especially later on, but some of it just feels a bit much like it's unnecessary guff. And again, I don't mind the final episode. It's fine for what it is. I mean, in many ways, I guess it's inevitable that the final season is perhaps not as exciting and not as thrilling as previous ones, because it all boils down to a fairly simple battle between good and evil, ultimately. You know, it's like all the mysteries and all the complexity. You're nearing the end, so you have to wrap that up. But when it ultimately all boils down to something fairly simple, it perhaps feels a little bit disappointing compared to kind of all the theories and everything else. But again, like I said, I don't hate the season and I don't hate the final episode. It's fine. I just think the execution of some of the ideas in the season could have been done a little bit better, perhaps. 5th place, season 2, I think. I know this is a popular season. I'm okay with it. I found it, even at the time, I found it a little bit kind of slow and at times somewhat dull. I'm not a big fan of the Hatch storyline. It takes far too long. The whole thing stretched over the season. It takes far too long, really, to go anywhere. And I'm not a massive fan of... The Lost has this thing of most seasons kind of introduce new characters, and some seasons do that better than others. I'm not a big fan of the new characters introduced in season 2, mostly because most of them are freaking dead by either the end of the season or early the following season, which kind of makes them seem a little bit pointless, you know? It's kind of like, why do we waste so much time on these characters when none of them are actually important, really? Because they're all dead within a year or so. It just feels a bit... And I think, again, there are some good ones, but I think this is where some of the problems with the flashbacks started, where they started to get a bit perfunctory and unnecessary and reinforcing stuff that we already knew or we didn't need to know. Again, it's not a bad season. There's plenty of good episodes. It does introduce the wonderful Michael Emerson, which, I've got to give anything kudos. But I find it a little bit... It's like we're past the first season, but we're not really getting into the main thrust of the narrative that kind of comes later on. It's okay. Fourth place, I would say season 1. I've seen like YouTube comments that indicate that a lot of people prefer season 2 to season 1. I don't really agree with that. I prefer season 1 because it's a much fresher season because it's the start of everything, and in most cases the flashback stuff, it's necessary because it's telling us stuff we don't know. It's telling us stuff that the characters are not going to tell each other, and it's important that we as the audience know so that we understand these characters. And of course some of the flashback storylines are brilliant, and they actually tie in with what's happening, like Claire's episode and Hurley's episode and all of that stuff. So I like season 1. I mean, I have to admit, the slow pace of the first 2.5 seasons is perhaps one of the reasons why I don't rewatch Lost as much as some other shows, because that slow pace can get a bit on repeated viewings. It's certainly repeated viewings in relatively short spaces of time. Later seasons have a much faster pace. That slow pace can be a bit grinding, but I find season 1, fresh and interesting and more important really than a lot of season 2. That's just my opinion. Third place, season 3. I know season 3 copped some criticism because of the slow pace of the first half of the season, and I agree with that. We are reaching that point where I felt we were reaching it in season 2, where some of the flashbacks are just unnecessary and just padding. But we get a much closer look at the others. We find out who the others really are. We get Julia introduced. Michael Emerson becomes part of the main cast as Ben, one of the great TV villains of all time. I love Michael Emerson. He's fantastic. I first saw him as a serial killer in a multi-episode arc in The Practice in like 2000. I thought he was fantastic in that, just absolutely creepy as all hell. And I really took notice of him in that. He was an absolute scene stealer. I think he won an Emmy, like a guest star Emmy for that, quite rightly. He next popped up in Saw, of course, the original Saw, as the guy that, spoiler alert, you think is the killer, but who turns out to be just another victim. So I was delighted. I already knew who he was, so I was delighted when he showed up in Lost, and I was even more delighted when they made him a regular and essentially made him the main villain, at least for several seasons. So that's definitely a highlight. And again, the second half of the season, it's so obvious that the writers got their end point from the network, because obviously the network wanted the show to carry on forever, which was making it very difficult for the writers because they knew where they were going, but how can you how can you stretch this out, especially when you don't know when there's an end? They got an end point of 6 seasons, and you can tell because suddenly the second half of season 3, the pace picks up considerably and things start getting more and more exciting. That's why I like the season. You really, even though, some of the earlier episodes, they are a bit slow, but that's compensated for by Ben, frankly, in my opinion. And certainly when the pace picks up in the second half of the season, things really start rocking. Second place, I would say, is season 5. Now, season 5, I really like season 5. I also have some issues with it because it's certainly the point where the genre stuff really kind of went in your face. And I can see why some people kind of felt like it was becoming a different show with all the like the time travel stuff and all of this stuff. I mean, certainly the first few episodes with the constant flashes, yeah, they start to do your head in after a while. Once it kind of settles down and they get stuck into the Dharma Initiative storyline, it's much kind of easier to cope with. The off-island stuff in those first few episodes, though, with Jack and Ben and all those guys, that stuff is brilliant. I like season 5 again. It's much fast. It's a much, by this point we're at a much faster pace, and it's a really exciting season. It's a really strong season, but it's not my favorite, because my favorite season at number 1, I'm sorry, it is season 4, like a rocket. I mean, I remember loving season 4 at the time. Watching them again this year, I was struck by just what a tight and efficient and lean season it really is. It's the shortest season, because all of the last 3 seasons they were cut down from like 24 episodes to about 17, again to make it pacier. But because of the writer's strike, season 4 actually only has 14 episodes, and it moves like a bat out of hell. But unlike season 6, where you kind of feel like this, you kind of feel like some stuff could have done with more development. Again, that's partly down to the pacing with the side flashes, the sideways storyline, whatever you call it. Season 4 doesn't have that pacing problem, in my opinion. It just, it's really putting the gas pedal down, and it's also the season of Lost that is most like a thriller. The first few seasons are very much mystery. Season 5 is much more sci-fi. Season 6 heads much more into supernatural fantasy territory. Season 4 is the most like basically a straight thriller. And I think it's an absolutely cracking season. It had me on the edge of my seat from start to finish, even on a rewatch. And it does also my favourite job of any season of introducing new characters. The freighter characters, Dan and Frank and Miles and Charlotte, they do a stunningly good job of introducing these 4 new characters. 4 seasons in, they introduce them all in like 1 episode. And within a couple of episodes, it feels like they've been there forever. That's an amazingly slick and clever and efficient way of introducing new characters and making them feel within a couple of episodes as familiar and comfortable as the guys we've been watching for 3 years. That's a really good job that they did with that as well. And yeah, it's just a tremendously exciting season. It's the best Ben season. I mean, Michael Emerson is absolutely cracking form as Ben. I find it hilarious that apparently he said in an interview that he basically played Ben in season 4 as though he were in a comedy series, only nobody else realized it. And it actually makes sense, because almost, even though he's like the most despicable villain imaginable, almost every other thing he says is just absolutely fucking hilarious, because he's just such a self-centered sociopath who just does not give a crap about anyone or anything else. That's hilarious. He's hilarious in this season, and yet you're kind of boo-hissing him at the same time as you are laughing at him. I love season 4. That's an absolutely cracking season, and it's my favourite season of Lost. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.